welcome to the Point Blank Podcast Network. My name is Donna Anthony. I am born and raised here in Alaska, retired police officer, and I am the owner of the Point Blank Firearms and Self-Defense Training. Our podcast is about faith, family, firearms, and our freedoms. We see our freedoms being attacked a little bit more and more in the last year. And today I have a great guest speaker. Our topic today is research behind the possibilities of voter fraud and election integrity. My guest speaker today is Dr. John Lott. He is the president of Crime Prevention Research Center. John, thank you so much for being on our show. I met you 3 years ago when I was in DC. One thing I wanted to bring up was you have written several books. I just want to bring up some of these books before I have you do your intro here. One of the books is The War on Guns, and it's aiming yourself against gun control and lies. Then you have Gun Myths, how politicians, the media, the blotched studies have twisted the facts on gun control. This one here looks interesting. Dumbing down the courts, how politics keep the smartest judges off the benches. I'll have to read that one. More Guns, Less Crime. I know that's super popular. You have several books out there. How many books do you have, sir?
I have 10 books.
Okay, I had 7, 10. You have a lot of books. Well, Dr. Lott, before I go into a couple of questions on the research of election integrity or voter fraud, can you tell me about your training and your experience so I can show the audience that you are an expert on the topics we're about to talk about?
Sure. I have a Ph.D. in economics. I've been academic most of my life. I've had positions at the Wharton Business School, Stanford, University of Chicago, Yale, Rice University. I've been chief economist at the United States Sentencing Commission. I was senior advisor for research and statistics at the U.S. Department of Justice. So I've kind of done a lot of different things.
Yeah, and the books as well. So here's one of the questions I have for you. I was looking at your article you wrote back in 2006. And in 2006, you wrote on evidence of voter fraud and the impact of regulations to reduce fraud on voter participation rates. What was the outcome of that research that you did back in 2006?
Well, it's basically indicating that if you try to put anti-fraud type provisions in with things like voter IDs or other restrictions, it doesn't necessarily reduce the number of people who are voting. You have different factors that are going different ways. You may increase the cost of people voting, but you also make people believe that their vote's more likely to actually count. And so, the data there was looking at U.S. data, but, there's some interesting data from Mexico, for example. In Mexico in 1991, they passed rules which banned absentee ballots for people living in the country or living outside the country. They required biometric IDs that had your picture as well as your thumbprint and other biometric information. You had to go in twice in order to go and get it. Wow. And there was only one place within a Mexican state to get it. So that could be, a 50, 75, 100-mile trip for sure. They had to go to apply, and then they had to go back again for another trip to pick it up. You felt for sure there should be a huge drop in voter participation.
You would think,
with all those costs.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, if you look at the 3 presidential elections after the vote changed compared to the 3 beforehand, the voter participation rate increased by 9 percentage points, from 59% to 68%. And I would argue you saw some similar evidence to that in the United States. People think that there's significant fraud and that their vote's not going to count. So-called fix-in with the election, and that imposes incentives to actually show up and vote.
So you didn't really see voter suppression after this. You said there was a 9% increase after the changing of their voter laws, such as the thumbprint and
the way I would put it is the concerns. Right. The way I would put it is the concern about voter suppression. If you're concerned about that, then making people believe that you're not going to do anything about vote fraud, that suppresses people's votes.
That's true. I do agree. I do hear that a lot. And then I was actually looking at another study with the Wall Street Journal. So this one I found interesting. You start discussing the anti-fraud voting reactions on other countries. What did you learn from your research with other countries?
Right. Well, it's something that the Crime Prevention Research Center worked on recently. We looked at the voting rules in Europe and as well as developed countries around the world. And what you find is that they're much more into anti-fraud type provisions than any of the states in the United States. You look at Europe, for example, there are 47 countries in Europe. 46 of the countries in Europe mandate that you have to have government issued photo IDs in order to go and vote. The one outlier there has been the UK, but even they have required it for parts of their country. Northern Ireland has required government issued photo IDs, and some local elections in England have required government issued photo IDs. And recently, as of a couple months ago, Boris Johnson's government has put forward legislation to require government issued photo IDs for the entire country. So within a couple months, you're going to see all of Europe, all 47 countries in Europe, when the UK gets in line, are going to require government issued photo IDs. And the interesting thing is how, these are socialist governments, non-socialist, conservative, labor. The agreement across the political spectrum that you have government issued photo IDs in order to go and vote. Some of them go beyond that. Some of them require that you have to have passports to vote. Many of them require national ID cards, which basically show citizenship. And a number of countries require things like indelible ink that they put on people's hands when you go and vote to make sure that people don't vote multiple times. But just to give you an example, look at Northern Ireland. Margaret Thatcher's Conservative government in 1985 passed the first voter ID rules. And then in 2002, Tony Blair, the Labor government, was concerned that some of the IDs that the Conservative government had approved were being forged. And so they introduced tamper-resistant government photo IDs that were required for people to go and vote. So you have both Conservative and Labor governments working together there to try to reduce vote fraud. After the statute of limitations had kind of run out, there were some academics who interviewed leaders of Sinn Féin and other political organizations in Northern Ireland. And Sinn Féin, for example, they talked about how they had whole fleets of cab drivers that would go and ferry people from one polling place to another to vote multiple times.
Wow.
They had printing shops set up in order to create forged IDs for people so that they could pretend to be multiple people. That they had houses set up where people could go change wigs, change clothes to make it more difficult to go and identify them. We talk about, vote fraud not happening in the United States. The way they measure that here in the United States, the way academics have done, is to look at the number of convictions. The problem is that's not a very useful way, and Europe and other developed countries have recognized that. So, for example, if you look at the types of cases where they've caught people doing vote fraud in England, it's been somebody who's been stupid enough to vote multiple times at the same polling place. And they may even then be an unusual person, like very tall or wearing unusual clothes or something like that draw attention to them. Or somebody bragging on social media that they voted multiple times. But after the Labor government passed its tamper-proof ID requirements, or tamper-resistant ID requirements, there was about 11% drop in the number of people who were registered to vote. And the Labor government took that as evidence that there were a lot of non-existing people who had been registered to vote that were there.
That's amazing.
But But, that's not the only thing. I mean, you look at rules like regarding absentee ballots, for example. 74% of European countries ban absentee ballots for people living in the country. Another 21% of the countries require that you have to have a photo voter ID in order to go and pick up the absentee ballot. They will not send it in the mail. So that's 95% of Europe, which has much stricter absentee ballot rules and either a ban or rules for obtaining one than any state in the United States has. And even some of that 21% limited to people who are either in the military or the hospital. But they don't take your word for it that you're not going to be available. You have to have third-party verification from them in order to do that. And so, it's, you look at the objections to some of the state rules that are being passed here in the United States. In Texas, what got Democrats upset was that the Republicans said you have to allow ballot box watchers. You cannot leave ballot boxes unattended. The thing is, you look around the world, there's no country that I can find that ballot boxes unattended. All the countries are concerned about chain of custody type issues, making sure that somebody's monitoring it at all times. Yet the notion that you're going to require people to watch the ballot box, that you're just not going to leave it out at 3 a.m. in the morning unattended, is something that Democrats claim is racist and, anti-democratic. I mean, you read the New York Times, you read the Washington Post, and they're constantly attacking Republicans as being anti-democratic, authoritarian, because they want to require that people have to put down the last 4 digits of their Social Security number on their absentee ballots that they send in. There's no country in Europe that would let you just put down those 4 digits on it. None of the 95% would do that. You have to have a government-issued photo ID. You have to show it to somebody if they're going to, even for those countries that allow it. So, I listen to these discussions, and I guess my response is, well, if you think the United States is anti-democratic and those relatively few states that require some type of photo ID, then that means you must believe that Sweden and France and other countries are authoritarian too.
Well, and you hear, and this is what I hear here in Alaska, well, what about the people who don't have IDs? Have you seen statistics of individuals who don't have IDs who cannot vote? Have you seen anything like that?
Well, I've seen claims about it. I guess my point is that all these other countries have had similar debates about this type of thing. The IDs in the states that require photo IDs, you can obtain it for free. And the point is, if you want to vote, then you can show up and go and get it. Maybe, I don't know how people survive without any IDs. I don't know how they can't have a bank account. They can't go to a hotel. They can't even get COVID vaccines without having a government ID. They can't travel. But, if there are people that they can't get welfare checks, they can't get Social Security checks, so it just, but if there, to the extent that there are people that have no ID, like they may say, well, not everybody has a driver's license. Okay, fine. Maybe they have another type of ID. There's not really good statistics that kind of rule out that people don't have one type of ID. You may say not everybody has a driver's license, or not everybody may have, some other type of ID that's there. But the question is, if somebody wants to vote, is it that difficult for them to get a free ID there to be able to go and vote? And if I can get my ID, fine. But if I want to go and vote, is it reasonable rules for people to go and obtain one. And the thing is, all these other countries have had the same debate, have had the same discussion, and they've all decided that it's a reasonable trade-off. As I said, you actually see increases in voter turnout, or at least no drops, in the states or the countries that have required these types of ID.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you talked about overseas, if the military in the hospital is a third party. How's that process work?
Well, the hospital will have to put out a notarized form saying that you will be in the hospital on election. And so, and that will be sent directly from the hospital to the voter center there, and they will process it and then allow you to go with your photo ID to go and pick up the absentee ballot.
That was interesting. You did an investigation piece on mail-in voter fraud in Montana. Was that this year or was that last year?
That's November.
November. Can you tell me, can you talk about the investigation and what you learned from that?
Sure. Well, I mean, I wasn't actually involved in the audit itself. My role was more of a reporter afterwards, but there have been concerns about irregularities in Missoula County elections. Missoula is the second most populous county in Montana. What had happened was they did an all mail-in election this last November. So the audit that they did basically looked at the absentee ballot envelopes, and they counted them up. And they also looked at some aspects of them. What they found, though, was disturbing. They found that there was 6%, about 6.3% more votes counted than absentee ballot envelopes, which seems impossible. And then if you include cases where there are missing dates, or the signatures weren't checked, or the signatures were missing on the envelopes, you're talking about over 7% of the votes may have been illegal. Unfortunately, the county erased the video evidence that was there, where the voting process, counting process was monitored, and so it's very difficult now to kind of go back and put pieces together about what happened. We just know that we have a big gap between the number of votes that were counted and the number of envelopes were there, which shouldn't be there. And the problem is, since Missoula is the second most populous county in the state, that not only 7% of the votes could go and swing a number of local elections, it can also swing statewide elections that are occurring. Missoula has been the only county so far. Hopefully soon we'll get information from Maricopa County in Arizona. They're saying by the end of the month. There may be something that goes forward in Fulton County in Georgia. But so far, Missoula County is the only county where there's been this type of systematic review of the voting.
Interesting. And what have you heard out of Arizona? Anything at all, or is that just pretty much wait until the end of this month for what they're seeing? Anything with absentee ballots, kind of what you're seeing in Montana?
They've kept their cards close to their vest, which is good, rather than having little things leak out. So hopefully at the end of the month, we'll get, a report.
We have a group of people up here in Alaska actually looking into issues here. And I had two questions from individuals that wanted me to ask you. One is John Nelson. And as he's looking at the numbers, kind of the same thing with absentee ballots. We have more absentee ballots than we do actually voters here in the state of Alaska. He wanted to know, packing the voter rolls, how does this play into manipulation of elections? Does this create a phantom voters? That was his question. What's your thoughts on that?
Right. Well, you have lots of problems with absentee ballots. One is just you can have a problem known as vote buying. And there are countries around the world that have run into this problem. France used to have a system similar to ours up until 1975. The problem with absentee ballots is, particularly if you combine it with things like vote harvesting, is that people can see how you voted to know whether to pay you. Okay, if you have secret ballots and you go into a voting booth, they're not going to pay you because they're not sure how you ended up voting. With absentee ballots, they can see how you voted. So that's one issue that you have. The other thing, last year I was living in Nevada, and they had an all mail-in election, and I was living in an apartment, and you'd get mail from people who had been living in the apartment, 4 times before you. You go into the mailroom and there would be tons of mail-in ballots all over the floor or in the garbage cans or what have you. They quickly disappeared there. But, somebody could go and pick up one of those absentee ballots, fill it out, or, pick up 100 of them, fill them out and mail them in. And last year they didn't check the signatures on the absentee ballots. And even when they do check it through a computer, it's very kind of trivial checks. It's what they call 3-point checks, which are basically just, does the signature go up and down type of pattern that's there. And, so there's real issues that are there. And you have other types of issues with absentee ballots. There's been cases in the United States that have been documented where people go and steal other people's ballots. They may go and fill out for people that pretend to be them, and go and request the absentee ballots and then pull them out of their mailboxes. There's a case in a congressional race in North Carolina where one of the sides went and requested absentee ballots for lots of people, and then knew when they would be arriving and stole them out of their mailboxes, and then filled them out and sent them in. And some people wouldn't vote, so they would never know that happened. In other cases, people would go and try to show up and vote and be told that they'd already voted, and then they'd have a provisional ballot that would be issued to them. But you had a case in Birmingham, England, in 2006, where it's estimated that about 40,000 votes were done via absentee ballots for other people. There's a large Muslim community in Birmingham, and the Labour Party was concerned that because of the UK's involvement in the war in Iraq, that they would be voting against Labour at that time. And so there were a number of Labour members who ordered absentee ballots for lots of people and filled it out for them. So they've adopted photo ID rules for absentee ballots after that.
Wow.
And you have lots of concerns that exist with absentee ballots.
So what's your opinion with Dominion system? And we also obviously have issues with the ballot or the ballots, but what's your opinion on the Dominion system?
I would focus on other issues.
Okay.
I'm not saying for sure that there was or was not a problem there. I think it's very difficult to show anything on that at this point. And I think there's been much more harm done to the debate over this by people like Sidney Powell and whatever coming out and saying, release the Kraken, and then not providing anything on that.
Right.
Because, if you go into court, you provide your strongest evidence. You don't throw everything up against the wall hoping something's going to stick, because what happens in that case is that the other side is going to go and focus on your weakest link, because if they discredit part of your stuff, then it's going to make it so that people are less likely to believe any of the stuff that you put out. And so if it were me, I would stay as far away from that as I could.
And what's your thoughts on, many of us watched the news where we saw Georgia, you've got Arizona, you've got Philadelphia, you've got all these individuals who are different parties doing affidavits saying they saw some issues with elections during that day. So we have all these affidavits, and as a police officer, for me, if I've got all these affidavits, I would actually start an investigation and start looking into it. We're not seeing that. What's your thoughts about that?
Would change because of fraud, and the Republicans would say, "Look, we weren't allowed to have observers watch what was going on in parts. In Philadelphia, they may be 25 feet away from the opening of the ballots or the counting that was there. In Allegheny County in Pennsylvania, which is Pittsburgh, they were forced to watch from another room via pretty useless closed circuit television and stuff. And so the Republicans said, look, we need to have discovery in order to go and provide definitive evidence for you on the size of the problem. And the judges would say, we're only going to grant discovery if you can show us up front that there was enough fraud occurring to go and change the outcome of the election. The Republicans said, we can't do that until you grant us discovery. It's kind of weird. I mean, normally you don't have to prove your case to be granted discovery. But, we for some 60 cases, but the judges eventually, even if they won at lower court levels, lost on appeal. But none of those cases actually investigated the evidence of the vote fraud. They kept on saying that you have to have enough evidence before we'll grant you discovery in this. And so Republicans had faced kind of a catch-22. You look at a place like Pennsylvania, the state Supreme Court, their case went to them saying, look, our judges had to be 20, 25, 100 feet away from the ballot counting. They weren't allowed to observe it. And the state Supreme Court, which is dominated by Democrats 5-2, said, look, the law doesn't say how close you have to be. They just say you have to observe it. And if the county having you 100 feet away is what we want for safety rules there, then that's up to the county to decide what it is. Obviously, you would think observe means be able to go and actually see it. But those were some of the more outrageous decisions that you faced.
Well, now we see H.R. 1 on the floor of Congress. They say it's the people's bill. How do you feel about that bill?
Well, the Senate, this is Tuesday. I'm not sure when this video is going to be released, maybe later today. 5 Eastern time today, I believe the Senate is scheduled to take up their version of the so-called For the People Act. And it would abolish ID requirements. All an individual has to do is swear that they are who they say they are. And the people in the booth accept that. Whoever they say they are is who they are as far as the voters are concerned. And, and there are other issues that are there. They're basically going to force us to have all mail-in elections. So I think there's real problems. I mean, it's kind of a recipe for having massive vote fraud that could occur. If you completely get rid of vote IDs, we're already an outlier in terms of how easy it is to vote in terms of not having anti-fraud provisions. You look at Canada, they require photo IDs to vote. You look at Mexico, they require biometric photo IDs, where they not only check your picture, but your thumbprint when people go and vote. Right. So why they think the United States is going to be unique. You look at developed countries, there's only 4 countries right now that don't require government-issued photo IDs to vote. One of those is the UK that we've talked about, and they're shortly going to change. Two of them are Japan and New Zealand. New Zealand technically requires you have to have an ID, but it has a unique number on it, similar in Japan. You have to go in, take your number, fill it out on your form that's there. In Japan, if you've lost your identification number, then you'll go and supply a photo ID and they'll check who you are. So really, all those countries require some type of unique identifier that's there. The one exception has been Australia. When you go and vote in Australia, what they do is they ask you a series of questions, what your name is, what your address is, and they asked you whether you voted in the most recent election. It's kind of that question, I guess they kind of view as, if you're a real person, if you're somebody who isn't pretending to be somebody else, then you'll know whether you voted in the last election or not. But that's the country with the loosest rules in terms of voting requirements. All Europe and all developed countries. So
knowing all this and how the other countries are working really hard to make sure they have voter integrity, looking at the United States, it sounds like we're probably at the bottom of the list. What can we do as the public, we the people? How do we get involved? How do we fix the problem that we're having? What do you suggest? Well, I guess your politicians know how you feel about these things. Senator Murkowski has come out in favor of some of these vote changes that are occurring. She's supporting one of the bills, this John Lewis bill, which would weaken some of the rules that are there in different states. You are disappointed that they're like that, I guess. That's a political decision. I'm not really involved in that type of thing. I'm just trying to do research here. But if that's what you care about, you let your politicians know, or next election, you supposedly vote for somebody who more closely mirrors your views on that. Yeah, well, you brought Murkowski. Many of us did support Murkowski, but I think she's lost the public support here in Alaska. She doesn't have Alaskan values anymore, and we believe in election integrity, and most of Alaskans do. That's why I wanted to have you on the show, so they can hear kind of what you researched and what you found in other countries, and where Alaska rates in this. I'm just shocked on how we're behind. We're behind compared to other countries from what your research is showing. There's a reason why all these countries have adopted the rules they are. They haven't always had these rules. A number of countries have changed over time. I mentioned Ireland, for example, Northern Ireland. Like France. France used to have absentee ballot rules like what we have in the United States up until 1975, when they discovered literally hundreds of thousands of dead people who had voted, and they discovered large-scale vote buying. It was only by accident, only by luck, in a sense, that they discovered the large-scale vote buying. There were people who were involved, kind of lower-level people who were involved in the vote buying, who were just disturbed by what they saw, and they went to local prosecutors, and it was only as a result of them doing that. Because otherwise, it's difficult. Vote buying, both the person who's selling the vote and the person who's buying it have an interest to keep it quiet, right? Because the guy who's selling it, he's getting money, so he likes selling his vote. And the guy who's buying it must think he's better off by buying his vote more than the amount that he's paying for. And so it's hard to go and prove those types of things that are occurring. There have been some convictions in the United States. Los Angeles, I think a year or so ago, had like 6 people that had been convicted because they were going down through Skid Row and giving people cigarettes and alcohol and other things in order to get them ready, because California is like same-day registration, and they allow ballot harvesting. And so they're going through, registering people, getting them to vote, paying them, and then collecting their votes and turning them in. If people wanted to reach out to you or learn more about what you have? I know you have a website, you have some books. Where can they go?
Well, our website is crimeresearch.org, crimeresearch.org. That's for the Crime Prevention Research Center. And they can find all sorts of stuff on our website. So, and if you click on one of the links, you'll see our books and our research. There's a tab at the top for so people can see a lot of the things that we've just been talking about.
Yeah, you've got a lot of great information. It's not just election integrity or election fraud. You've got a lot of great information on guns and gun control. You've done a lot of research, phenomenal information.
We've done work on policing. We've done work on lots of different crime issues. I mean, election integrity issues are crime-related issues, just like policing and gun issues are too.
Right. Are you looking at, we've got the defund the police issue going on, and being a retired police officer, they're saying, on national news that we're attacking more blacks. Are you seeing that in your studies?
We have research on that. And in fact, that's simply a myth. I mean, we have data that looks at the rate that black officers shoot black suspects compared to white officers doing it, and black officers shoot them at least as often as white officers do. Part of the problem, and one of the things we found, was that if a white officer shoots a black suspect, the news coverage of it will mention the race of both the officer and the suspect. If a black officer shoots a black suspect, only the race of the suspect will be mentioned. Black shooting a white, you won't see the race of either of them mentioned. And if you only hear about white officers shooting black suspects, and you don't hear, and if the black officer shoots a black suspect, you only hear about the race of the person who shot. My guess is a lot of people infer, well, it must be another white officer doing it, or at least there's some chance that that's the case. But it creates an imbalance. You have a lot of similar types of media bias issues on guns. And other issues. I just mentioned one thing on guns, and that is you have a mass public shooting in the United States, it gets massive news coverage. You get a mass public shooting in France or other countries, it very often doesn't get news coverage. People know about the New Zealand mass public shooting in which 49 people were killed, but would they know that within less than 24 hours of that, there was a big school shooting in Brazil, or that there was a mass public shooting in the Netherlands? You look over the last decade and could just compare Western Europe, not Eastern Europe, where there's a lot of mass public shootings, but just Western Europe to the United States, which place has the two worst mass public shootings? It's interesting. It's Western Europe. You have the attack in France, in Paris, in November 2015, where 130 people were killed. You have the Norway shooter in 2011, July 2011, in which, if you just look at the people who were shot to death, not the bombing deaths that were there, you had 67 people that were shot to death. Both of those are significantly more than the worst mass public shooting in the United States.
You're right.
Or any time. But my guess is relatively few people know about that. So, you look at a country like Russia, they have mass public shootings all the time. They have, if you put it on a per capita basis, their rate's about 50% higher than the rate in the United States. You just, when you have an attack at a school or at a university or other places, even if they get coverage from those other countries, it's going to be a short story in the back of a newspaper, and it'll be just one news story on it. It's not going to be a week or a month. It's not going to be even two stories on it.
So where does the United States place in research for active shooters compared to other countries? Do you know where we would be?
Over the 20 years from 1998 through 2017, United States ranked about, I believe it was 65th in terms of per capita rates of deaths from mass public shootings. There are 108 countries that we identified cases with. The thing is, since you have to rely on news stories for a lot of these other countries, while I'm completely sure I get all the cases in the United States, I don't believe I've gotten all the cases in the rest of the world. And, so even that probably overestimates the United States. But if you, just on average, the United States makes up about 1% of the world's mass public shooters, even though we make up about 4.6% of the world population. So we're way below the average. I mean, there are a number of countries in Europe that have higher death rates per capita. France, Finland, Norway, Switzerland, Russia, number of countries in Eastern Europe that have higher per capita rates than the United States. But once you get outside of Europe, a lot of countries have much, much higher rates than the United States does.
Yeah, you wouldn't think that the way our media portrays it. And I think if people want to learn more, they definitely need to go to your website. I know on the left side of your website, you've got different categories and all the research behind it. You have a wealth of knowledge. I want to say thank you so much for all the research you've done. Can you go ahead and say your website where they can go again?
crimeresearch.org, crimeresearch.org.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. And this will be posted on pointblankak.com. Again, that's pointblankak.com. And we'll have Dr. John Lott's information, his website, all posted there. John, thank you so much. Us Alaskans appreciate everything you've done, and hopefully get the information out. So thank you, sir.